In lots of different animated series and comics, there are characters that have really cool, ultimate, super, mega sorts of forms. In Dragon Ball Z, there's things like Super Saiyans. In Pokemon, there's Mega Evolutions and Dynamaxing. In Ben 10, there's Ultimate Alien Forms. Heck, even Ultra Instinct Shaggy, who is sort of the influence for this episode, is being properly acknowledged in that new Multiverses video game. But that, of course, got me thinking, what about the characters that don't have ultimate forms? Surely someone like Frozone or Tai Lung could have really cool looking mega versions of themselves, right? So, we're attempting to make those today. Let's get into it, shall we? Let's go. Hit like if you want, subscribe if you feel like, but either way, enjoy the show. With supers regaining their legal right to use their powers for the good of others, many heroes were taking to the streets once again. But soon after, this meant many new villains were coming to light, and many old ones were resurfacing, eager to test their might against the heroes. Lucius Best, more publicly known as Frozone, was one of the first to join the good fight again, as he'd often done illegal hero work even when supers were outlawed and in hiding. The only problem was, he wasn't as spry as he used to be. He was getting up there in years compared to many of the young vital villains running around, and if he was going to keep up, he needed some kind of upgrade. He turned to the person that all the best heroes entrusted to make them the most durable attire a hero could don, Edna Mode. She was incredibly eager to help as always, and within a few days she turned around a super suit for him that would be a massive help in his work. First off, it was significantly more durable and flexible than his last suit. In it, taking a punch would feel like being grazed by a feather. But the greatest addition to the suit was a button on the belt that, when pressed, created an invisible aura around Frozone that significantly amplified his powers for 10 minutes. It made him able to draw far more moisture from the air from much further away to freeze. He also became much more able to manipulate the form of ice he made. He could have it coating over parts of his body and make various weapons and gauntlets with it. He could even control the ice enough to have it floating around him and fire off as projectiles with just a thought. With these additions and this new form, Frozone quickly rose up the ranks of the most renowned heroes and managed to greatly surpass even the acclaim he'd had back in his heyday of crime fighting. He'd proven to all that age truly is just a number. At least, when you have a friend like Edna Mode backing you up, that is. Now, the first two characters I knew I wanted to use for this episode were Frozone and Tai Lung. I actually thought up Tai Lung first and was most excited to do that one, and even considered making this episode just villains specifically, but when Frozone came to mind, I was like, oh no, this has to be general animated characters because I really, really wanted to use Frozone. I mean, first of all, I just love rendering out icy textures, but also I just think Frozone is a really cool character, and I hadn't drawn him on the channel before. Also, anyone that watched the One Piece characters as mythical gods episode will see some similarities in what I'm doing with this design as the stuff I was doing there. First of all, with the background I end up doing here, pretty simple sort of stuff. But also the design idea of having something floating around behind the character. To me, that just feels like a really powerful thing. And also, I just like how it kind of can point us down towards the head or upper torso of the character to make that more of the focal point. So I was working some ideas that I would put into a mythical god character into this, and I think it ends up looking really cool. I also give him giant ice fists because, you know, it's me giving a character gigantic fists and forearms is just a thing I'm one to very often do, and I feel like there was a good excuse to do it in this episode. Very happy with this one. I think it's a good one to start the episode with, and I hope you all like it as well. Let's take a look. Prior to his death, Tai Lung had had a rather tragic life. Granted, his downfall essentially came by his own hand, as he'd turned from a promising student of Kung Fu, adopted by Kung Fu Master Shifu, into a power-hungry menace. But he still felt, even in death, that he deserved what he believed was his right to acquire in life: the power of the Dragon Warrior. After being murdered at the hands of a bumbling panda named Po, who too had been trained by Tai Lung's adoptive father, Lung had lived in the limbo of the spirit realm, stewing in the rage he felt at his unfinished work. But throughout history, many great kung fu masters had been banished to the spirit realm, along with many dark creatures of old. After years of remaining in this realm, Tai Lung was found by an ancient dark monster, the dragon Shen Su Da. The great beast could grant Tai Lung all its power if he returned to the land of the living and did the dragon's bidding. Tai Lung agreed, seeing this as his destined opportunity to gain the might of a true dragon warrior, even if it wasn't the way he'd foreseen it happening. So Shen Su Da granted Tai Lung his power, and the vengeful leopard returned to the world. At rest, he looked the same as he always had, but when he channeled all the might of the dragon, his body transformed. He sprouted the horns of a dragon and glowing spikes. His arms turned scaly and his claws ignited in a glowing, flaming aura. His incredible kung fu skills became amplified by the strength and speed and ferocity of a dark dragon, making him the most formidable foe the world had seen since the days of old. With this incredible power in his new form, he'd finally be able to get his revenge on the being who'd banished him to the spirit realm in the first place. His rage was set on defeating Po. Now, I'm surprised that I've never used Tai Lung on the channel before. I mean, I've used a few different Kung Fu Panda characters. I think maybe only in the animated characters as Mech Armors episodes, but either way, I'm a huge fan of the Kung Fu Panda series, and I really, really love Tai Lung. Both design-wise and character-wise, I just think he's super cool. And so for this design, I knew I wanted to make him some kind of dragon warrior, almost like a bit of a demonic dragon warrior, which is where the idea for that story came from. And so for his design in his ultimate form, I decided to take inspiration from Chinese dragons and work in elements of that into his body. I think some elements work better than others. I like the spikes and the horns. I like his bigger teeth and I don't even know what those things are called, the tendril mustache sort of things. The glowing aura on his hands is cool. I think the scales on his arms are a little bit weird. I don't know, gives him a bit of an Aquaman vibe, which I wasn't really going for. But overall, I'm pretty happy with the drawing and the design. I think one thing I don't do quite enough in this episode in general is change characters' proportions enough. In lots of different things when characters have ultimate forms, or I guess maybe I'm just thinking most about Ben 10, the proportion and silhouette of the character will change a lot. Maybe I'm even remembering that wrong, but it feels like something that I could have tried leaning into a bit more. Like, the silhouette of this character wouldn't be super different from how Tai Lung actually is. Regardless though, still pretty happy with this one, and I hope you all like it as well. All of Piltover was hunting Jinx. She felt abandoned and lost, as though her whole world had just come tumbling down. It seemed everyone now wanted to be her enemy, and she needed more than just her usual arsenal of weaponry to protect herself against what was to come. She did a series of raids to steal what hextech she could get from Piltover and returned to the Undercity to get building. She even enlisted the help of the Doctor, who many times had aided her surrogate father, Silco, in his experiments. She needed the Doctor to imbue what she was building with a special breed of the dangerous drug Shimmer to ensure she'd be strong enough to use this weapon. It took her weeks, and many times she had to move her operations as her hideouts got raided by enforcers, but eventually she was able to complete her greatest mechanical creation. Jinx had built a suit of armor with her signature weapons built into it to ensure nobody could ever harm her again. There were drawbacks, however. As instructed, the Doctor had rigged up the suit so a minuscule dose of shimmer dripped into her through it while she wore it. This was necessary as the shimmer made her much stronger and allowed her body to handle the weight and power of this suit. But shimmer is far from safe to use on a recurring basis. That meant using the suit drove her more and more insane, and with all that had happened in her life, Jinx didn't have an abundance of sanity to spare. Therefore, she only donned the suit for brief times when entering a situation that would be suicide to attempt unarmed. In those cases, when she wore the armor, she'd become nearly unstoppable. No hextech hammer or set of Atlas gauntlets would be anywhere near a match for her in this. But was wearing it really worth the cost of her sanity being slowly eroded more and more each time she wore it? Only time would tell. Now, because this one was a mech armor, I heavily considered having Benny Sharp narrate it, but writing the lore from Benny Sharp's perspective, it would have had to be very different and not really fit the ultimate form theme of this episode. So I was like, all right, I'll just do the little bit of regular lore for it. But honestly, I can't express how massive an influence Arcane has been on my writing recently. I mean, I know the visuals of the show are astounding as well, and the music is amazing, but just the way the characters were written, their emotional arcs, it was just so impactful. My most recent Multiverse Tales episode, even though, has a super goofy name, Benny Sharp Saves Christmas from Lots and Lots of Demons, the demon narrator character in that, Koshmara, who I introduce, her whole story arc that I have mapped out for the next few Multiverse Tales episodes is completely inspired by Arcane. Not specifically by any, plot elements from Arcane, but just from the emotional tone and the arcs of the characters, it was just a massive influence on me. So I actually wrote the lore for this suit trying to avoid spoilers for the show, because, it is fairly new, and I'm sure lots of people are still watching or haven't watched it yet and might want to, but I highly, highly recommend it if you haven't seen it yet. From a design perspective, I really like how this one turned out, though I do think with my mech armor and transformer kind of designs, every time I do them, I try to add more details, and I don't think that necessarily makes the designs better. I think some of my best mech armors have been ones where I did a medium amount of detail, then also focused a decent amount on the rendering, like my Kung Fu Panda one and my Arctiguana mech armor. I think those are two of my best. Again, still like this one, and I hope you all do as well. While his demeanor and appearance were very unsuspecting of any great power, Patrick Star had many times in his life been granted impressive abilities. He'd once gained the power to stretch to impossible lengths when he briefly joined the International Justice League of Super Acquaintances. He'd once been given the power to levitate ice cream cones with his thoughts. He'd briefly had super intelligence once, and even inherently had the ability to regenerate his limbs, as all starfish have. But most of those powers were only his for a brief time. Until one fateful day. The dopey starfish was out with his best friend Spongebob, catching jellyfish, when Patrick tripped on something buried in some tall seaweed. They brushed the plants aside to see that it was King Neptune's trident, the magical weapon of the god of the seas. They had no idea how it had gotten there or where Neptune was, but they knew they had to return it. That is, after they played around with its magical abilities for a while. They had no idea how to control it, but soon they found they could shoot various bursts of light and energy from it that they used to explode boulders, change the size of jellyfish, and even create triple gooberberry sunrise sundaes out of thin air. But eventually, one of the blasts went awry as it started bouncing all around them off the ground and off coral until it finally shot straight into Patrick. Suddenly, every ability he'd ever had came rushing back to him, along with many more. He suddenly had the power to control the flow of water around him. He could fly through the water at incredible speeds. He even, for some reason, sprouted strange-looking bananas from his head that he could pluck off and eat any time. The abilities deactivated after a few minutes and he returned to normal, but he soon found that anytime he needed them, he could reactivate these powers for a short period of time to help those in need. Or, just to do whatever with them. In truth, after a couple of weeks, he would rarely use the powers anymore, and even eventually forgot that he had them at all. Now, this one was kind of the joke one of the episode, but I still had a lot of fun drawing it out, and it was actually kind of difficult writing the lore for this one, because funny enough, even though I watched SpongeBob all the time as a kid, I knew the lore least well of the 4 shows and movies I was working with. If you can even call what SpongeBob has lore, like there is continuous stuff through the show, but because it's a, really goofy cartoony comedy show, there's, stuff that canonically doesn't really line up and things can change and the physics can just be whatever in any episode. So eventually, as I was thinking through the character, I just ended up going like, oh, whatever, I'm just gonna make it Super Saiyan Patrick. The design ended up staying very simple. It's just you know, buff Patrick that I was taking inspiration from the episode where they do the fry cook games. I was looking at that, but of course rendering it out a lot more. Gave him Super Saiyan hair. But the thing that I think makes this one is all the crazy energy going around him. I put water swirling around him and Super Saiyan glowy aura and some lightning and all that kind of stuff. So it's a very, very simple design, but I really like how this one turned out. I think it's a good dopey one to finish the video with. So let's take a look, shall we? Oh, there you go. A real interesting mix of characters in this episode, but I think it worked out pretty well. So, of course, the usual ending spiel. If you got any other ideas for things I could do with animated characters, leave them in the comments, or other kinds of characters that I could give ultimate forms to. All kinds of suggestions, just leave them below. I'm always replying to comments for the first hour a video's gone out, and I still look at a bunch of them after that. And of course, if you are new to the channel and you want to see some other videos, maybe you can check out my famous animated characters as Mech Armors episodes. But besides that, that's all for today, except of course for ending the video on a positive sort of note, and today I want to share a quote that I heard this week that I really, really like, which is that your relationship with yourself sets the tone for all your other relationships. It's a lot easier to be loving towards others when you're already being loving to yourself. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. I will see you all in the next episode on Monday, which is finally a sequel to a video I made like 4 months ago that I finally got an idea for what to do with the sequel. Partially inspired by a video game that comes out next week. I'll see you all there, love you all, and goodbye.